Picture this for a second. It's the middle of the night, quiet, dark, dead silent. Somewhere in Europe, an alarm goes off at 2:58 a.m., not for work, not for a flight, but for a regular season basketball game that most Americans would scroll past without noticing. No playoffs, no elimination stakes, just another Tuesday night game in Indiana. And yet, someone on the other side of the world is already wide awake, phone in hand, locked in. That alone should stop you, because that's not casual interest, that's not curiosity, that's obsession forming in real time. Now zoom out. This isn't one person, it's thousands, then tens of thousands, then fans popping up from places the league never planned for, never marketed to, never built infrastructure for. We're talking about people setting alarms in countries where women's basketball barely gets airtime, people rearranging their sleep schedules, people budgeting international flights for single games. That kind of behavior usually takes decades to build in sports. Dynasties, championships, cultural myths passed down generations. But this showed up almost overnight, and that's exactly why it's so dangerous. Because while the audience is treating this moment like something historic, the league seems stuck treating it like business as usual, and those two realities are colliding fast. The momentum feels unstoppable from the outside. The numbers are screaming, the engagement is off the charts, and yet, beneath the surface, cracks are already forming. Decisions, or the lack of them, are threatening to choke the very growth everyone claims to want. That's the part no one wants to talk about yet, but that silence is getting loud. This isn't how sports growth is supposed to look. Normally, leagues beg fans to care. They pour money into ads, partnerships, grassroots programs, influencer deals. Here, it's reversed. The fans are lining up with credit cards out, begging to be let in, begging to buy jerseys, begging to watch games without jumping through hoops, begging for the league to simply meet them halfway. And somehow, that's where everything starts falling apart. What makes this even more unsettling is how sudden it all feels. One season ago, most of these fans weren't watching the WNBA at all. Some didn't even follow basketball. Then one player entered the league and flipped the entire ecosystem upside down. Not through controversy, not through marketing tricks, but by being so undeniable that people couldn't look away. The kind of talent that forces attention, whether institutions are ready for it or not. And that kind of surge doesn't slow down politely, it demands a response. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Moments like this don't wait. They don't pause so organizations can catch up. They don't give second chances if they're mishandled. Sports history is full of what-ifs. Leagues that had lightning in a bottle and let it slip because they assumed it would always be there tomorrow. Fans are patient, but momentum isn't. Once habits break, they don't magically reset. Once emotional investment fades, it doesn't always return at the same intensity. That's why this moment feels different, bigger, heavier, like something no one was truly prepared for. Because this isn't just about one team or one season or even one superstar. It's about a global audience forming organically faster than systems can keep up. And the scary part, we're already seeing signs that the infrastructure underneath it all might not be strong enough to hold what's coming next. And what exposed all of this wasn't a major announcement or a press conference or a TV deal. It was one simple question, posted without much thought. That question didn't just reveal where fans were watching from. It exposed just how out of sync reality and leadership have become. And once you see the responses, you can't unsee them. It started as one of those harmless, low-effort social media prompts, the kind teams post all the time without expecting much back. On World Basketball Day, the Indiana Fever asked a simple question: where are you cheering from? No graphics, no campaign rollout, no hint that anything unusual was about to happen. And at first, everything looked normal. Replies rolled in from familiar places: Indiana, Iowa, Chicago, a few neighboring states. Exactly what you'd expect from a rebuilding team still finding its footing. Then the tone shifted. Subtly at first. A comment from Italy, another from Germany, someone checking in from the United Kingdom. Easy to dismiss as a couple of international fans passing through the algorithm. Except it didn't stop. It accelerated. Singapore showed up, then Greece, then Slovenia, then New Zealand, then Chile, and suddenly the replies stopped looking like a comment section and started reading like a roll call of the globe. Different languages, different time zones, different continents, all funneling into one thread under a question the team almost certainly didn't think twice about posting. What made it impossible to ignore wasn't just the geography, it was the tone. These weren't casual checking-in comments. People weren't saying they watched highlights or caught games when it was convenient. They were talking about alarms set in the middle of the night, about watching every single game live, no matter the hour, about dragging friends and family into fandoms that didn't exist for a year ago. This wasn't passive scrolling. This was commitment, the kind of commitment leagues spend entire careers trying to manufacture.
And it didn't feel engineered. That's what made it unsettling in the best way. No sponsored push, no international partnership announcements, no tour dates or exhibition hype, just fans finding each other in real time and realizing they weren't alone. One reply would spark 10 more. People started responding to each other, not the team, trading locations, joking about time zones, comparing how little sleep they were getting just to keep up. The post stopped belonging to the fever and started belonging to the fans. That's when the scale of it became clear. This wasn't about Indianapolis anymore, or even about the United States. This was a team in the Midwest becoming a global reference point for women's basketball without anyone in a boardroom telling it to happen. Entire fan identities were forming in the comments, completely disconnected from geography. People with no local teams, no cultural tie to the city, no history with the league, deciding in real time, this is my team. In most sports, that level of buy-in only comes after championships, dynasties, or decades of legacy. Here, it was happening in months. And it wasn't confined to one demographic either. Parents, kids, older fans, first-time viewers, lifelong basketball junkies, people who admitted they never watched a full NBA game in their lives but wouldn't miss a fever tip-off. The replies weren't polished or performative. They were raw, excited, emotional, like people stumbling into something they didn't realize they were missing. By the time the thread really took off, it was obvious this wasn't just a cool moment for social media. It was a signal flare. Proof that something massive was happening under the surface, faster than the league could track with metrics or projections. A global audience had already arrived, not hypothetically, not in future forecasts. They were here, watching, engaging, identifying themselves in plain sight. And the most telling part? Almost no one in those replies was asking why this was happening. They already knew. The question now was whether anyone in charge was paying attention. Because while that post revealed how far this team's reach had spread, it also exposed something far more uncomfortable, a gap between the passion flooding in and the league's ability to actually handle what comes next. Once you sit with those replies for a minute, something uncomfortable starts to emerge. This wasn't just global interest, it was sacrifice, real, tangible sacrifice. Fans weren't casually tuning in when it fit their schedule. They were bending their lives around tip-off times that made absolutely no sense on paper. Watching games at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, sometimes later. Not once or twice, but every single game. That level of commitment doesn't come from hype alone. It comes from emotional buy-in so strong that convenience stops mattering. One comment in particular hit like a punch. A fan from Italy explained they booked an entire transatlantic flight just to watch a single Fever game in New York. Not a vacation that happened to include basketball, not a multi-game road trip. One night, one game, thousands of dollars for a regular season matchup. That's the kind of story executives usually put on slides labeled aspirational fan behavior. Except this one wasn't hypothetical, it was already happening. Then there was Slovenia, a fan saying they had never watched a full Lakers game, never sat through a complete Dallas Mavericks game, but somehow, without hesitation, they watched every Indiana Fever game live from Slovenia, through brutal time differences, through work days and sleepless nights. And they weren't bragging, they weren't seeking attention, they were stating it like a fact, like this was the most natural thing in the world. That's when it became clear this wasn't about novelty. This wasn't about checking out women's basketball. This was devotion. It wasn't confined to overseas fans either. In Connecticut, something happened that rarely happens in professional sports. A Fever road game felt like a home game. Fans showed up wearing Indiana jerseys in a building that wasn't theirs, in numbers so large they outpaced the home crowd. That's not normal. That doesn't happen unless a shift is already underway. It's one thing to travel well in playoffs. It's another thing entirely to overtake an arena in someone else's city during the regular season. And then there were the quieter stories, the ones that didn't make headlines but said just as much. A fan in Hawaii explaining they don't have a local professional team, so the Fever became theirs by default. A family driving hours just to catch an away game because it was the only one they could afford. Parents pulling their kids into the sport and realizing they were just as invested as the children by halftime. This wasn't fandom being inherited, it was being discovered.
What makes all of this so hard to ignore is how fast it happened. These behaviors usually take years to develop, generations even. People don't normally plan international trips or lose sleep for teams they've followed for a few months. But that's exactly what was unfolding in plain sight. Fans weren't waiting for permission. They weren't waiting for the league to validate the moment. They decided on their own that this was worth it. This is the kind of energy sports leagues pray for and almost never get on command. It's unscripted, unpredictable, and impossible to fake. Because once fans are willing to give up sleep, spend their money, strain friendships, and rearrange their lives, you're no longer dealing with casual viewers. You're dealing with something far more powerful. And while all of this was happening, while fans were crossing borders, time zones, and expectations, something else was becoming painfully obvious. Their enthusiasm was racing ahead of the systems meant to support it, and the gap between those two realities was about to turn from embarrassing to impossible to ignore. That gap becomes impossible to overlook the moment you notice what fans start asking for next. Not more highlights, not interviews, not even more games. They're asking for the most basic expression of fandom there is: jerseys. And that's where the story takes a turn from inspiring to embarrassing. Because across that same comment section, filled with global devotion, one message kept repeating in different accents, from different continents, with the same frustrated tone. We want to buy them, and we can't. Fans from Greece, Chile, Norway, Rwanda, places the league claims to want to reach, weren't complaining about prices or designs. They weren't demanding exclusives. They were saying the simplest thing possible. The league would not let them give it money. Shipping options were non-existent. When they did appear, costs were so high they felt like a deterrent instead of an invitation. Some fans said the checkout wouldn't even load their country. Others joked that it was easier to fly to the US to watch a game than to get a jersey delivered to their home. That's the part that should make everyone uncomfortable. Because this isn't a complex problem. This isn't some cutting-edge technology hurdle. This is basic international e-commerce, something most mid-sized brands solve in their first few years of growth. And here you have a league in the middle of a global surge, with demand screaming at full volume, tripping over an issue the industry figured out decades ago. The desire is there, the audience is there, the money is sitting on the table, and somehow the door is locked. What makes it worse is the comparison nobody can avoid. The NBA solved this a long time ago. International shipping, regional warehouses, localized merchandise, global storefronts, it's all already built. In fact, the league's footprint stretches so far that its Southeast Asian operations are headquartered in Singapore. The blueprint exists, the infrastructure exists, the proof of concept exists, which raises the obvious question fans are already asking quietly among themselves. Why is the Women's League operating like this moment caught them by surprise? Because from the outside, it absolutely did. The comments don't sound angry at first, they sound confused, then hopeful, then annoyed.
Fans tagging accounts, replying to each other, asking if anyone's figured out a workaround, links being shared, dead ends everywhere. And the longer that silence stretches, the more goodwill starts leaking out of the room. Not because fans don't care, but because they care enough to notice they're being ignored. This is where momentum gets fragile. When passion meets friction, something breaks. Not all at once, slowly. One missed purchase, one extra step, one fan deciding it's not worth the hassle today and maybe trying again later. And later turns into next season. That's how you lose opportunities without ever seeing a dramatic collapse. It just fades quietly, while leadership wonders why the spike didn't last. What should terrify the league is that these aren't hypothetical customers. These are fans who are already waking up at 3 in the morning, already spending money on flights, already converting friends and family into viewers. The hardest part is done. The emotional investment is locked in. And yet the most basic signal of belonging, the ability to wear the jersey, is somehow out of reach. And once you see that disconnect, it reframes everything. Because if the league can't meet fans at the simplest level, it raises serious questions about how prepared it really is for what's unfolding. The passion is moving faster than the system, and that mismatch doesn't just stall growth, it exposes just how unready the infrastructure is for the kind of moment it's been handed. To understand why this moment feels different, you have to zoom out far beyond standings, ratings, or merchandise numbers. You have to go back to why basketball spread in the first place. In 1891, when James Naismith created the game, it wasn't designed to dominate television slots or fuel billion-dollar leagues. It was created to connect people, to give young men something meaningful to rally around indoors during the winter. The game didn't go global because it was marketed well. It went global because it traveled person to person, gym to gym, country to country, carried by people who believed in it. That's the parallel too obvious to ignore here. What's happening now doesn't look like a league rolling out an expansion strategy. It looks like the early days of basketball all over again, except this time it's happening in comment sections and group chats instead of YMCA basements. The spread isn't coming from executives or campaigns, it's coming from fans pulling other fans in, from siblings texting links across continents, from parents sitting down with kids and realizing halfway through the game that they're just as invested.
That's why the response feels emotional in a way analytics can't measure. You're not just seeing viewership grow, you're watching people build identity around a team they have no geographic obligation to support. A kid in Europe waking up before dawn to watch a team in Indiana is doing the same thing kids once did when they fell in love with soccer clubs halfway around the world. It's not rational, it's tribal. And once that switch flips, it doesn't flip back easily. This moment also blows up one of the laziest assumptions about women's sports, that the audience is niche, localized, or limited by culture. The replies tell a completely different story. Different languages, different religions, different backgrounds, all finding the same game compelling for the same reason. It's undeniable. Basketball at its core doesn't need translation. A deep three, a fast break, a clutch shot. Those moments land the same way no matter where you live. And right now, women's basketball is producing them at a level people simply weren't ready for. That's why this feels bigger than a breakout season, bigger than a star player, bigger than one team riding a wave. It feels like a cultural correction, like an audience that was always there finally found something worth reorganizing their attention around. And instead of waiting for permission, they just showed up, loudly, publicly, globally. When that happens, it creates a responsibility whether leadership wants it or not, because once a sport starts connecting people across borders organically, it stops being something you can manage slowly. It becomes something you either nurture properly or mishandle spectacularly. And the higher the emotional stakes climb, the more damaging missteps become. This is the part most leagues don't recognize until it's too late, that moments like this aren't just opportunities for revenue. They're moments where culture shifts, where loyalty forms fast and deep, and where the distance between once-in-a-generation and missed opportunity can be measured in a handful of decisions made behind closed doors.
And that makes what happens next far more serious than anyone wants to admit. There's no way around it. This surge didn't start with a marketing plan or a lucky algorithm swing. It started the moment one player stepped onto a WNBA floor and made it impossible to ignore what was happening. Caitlin Clark didn't just bring attention, she redirected it. People who had never watched a full women's game before suddenly found themselves staying through fourth quarters, not out of obligation, out of suspense, out of genuine curiosity about what she might do next. What makes this different from past breakout stars is how fast the conversion happened. Casual viewers didn't remain casual. College fans didn't treat the pro game like an afterthought. They followed her directly into the league and stayed there. One season was all it took to collapse the gap between NCAA hype and WNBA loyalty. That pipeline, something leagues have tried to engineer for years, just turned on by itself. And it didn't stop with her. That's the part critics miss when they try to frame this as a one-player phenomenon. Caitlin Clark didn't replace the league, she pulled people into it. Fans who came for her stayed for the team. They learned rosters, they debated rotations, they started recognizing tendencies, chemistry, rivalries. Suddenly, names that barely registered nationally before were trending internationally. The Fever weren't just being watched, they were being studied. That rising tide was lifting everyone around her. Aaliyah Boston wasn't just a former top pick anymore. She was being appreciated properly by a global audience. Kelsey Mitchell stopped being labeled underrated and started being described as what she's always been, elite. Lexi Hull suddenly had international fans breaking down her defensive effort like seasoned analysts. That doesn't happen unless people are truly watching. Even opposing teams benefited. Viewers tuning in for one player ended up learning entire rosters across the league. Rivalries felt sharper, matchups felt bigger, road games felt meaningful. This wasn't attention siphoned away from women's basketball. It was attention injected directly into it, and it arrived in volumes no one predicted. That's why the reaction from longtime players matters. When Sue Bird says this moment will be studied in the future, it isn't exaggeration, it's recognition. Veterans know when something unusual is happening because they've lived through stretches where growth felt slow, fragile, incremental. This isn't that. This is acceleration, the kind that doesn't politely wait for systems to adapt.
What Clark triggered wasn't just excitement, it was belief. Belief that women's basketball could command global attention on skill alone, that it didn't need to be framed, defended, or explained. Fans didn't feel like they were supporting a cause. They felt like they were watching something special, something worth rearranging their lives for. And that's what makes the next part so uncomfortable. Because moments like this don't belong to any one player, no matter how generational. They belong to the ecosystem that surrounds them. And once that ecosystem fails to keep pace with the demand a star creates, the damage doesn't land on the player first, it lands on the league that wasn't ready when everything changed. This is where excitement gives way to unease, because while the fan base is expanding at a pace no one predicted, the foundation underneath it is starting to shake. Momentum like this isn't permanent. It doesn't sit still. It either gets harnessed quickly or it drifts. And right now, there's a very real risk that the league is running out of time to get out of its own way. Behind the scenes, tension is building between the league and the players' union. Contract language, revenue splits, long-term guarantees. On paper, it sounds like standard sports business, necessary discussions, normal negotiations. But the timing couldn't be worse. Because this isn't a stable moment where growth is predictable and fan habits are already locked in. This is a fragile surge, a spark that could go out just as quickly as it lit up. Fans don't think in collective bargaining terms. They don't track negotiation deadlines or understand leverage points. What they understand is absence, delayed seasons, canceled games, uncertainty. History is brutal on this point. When momentum stops, it doesn't simply resume at full speed later. Habits break, attention shifts, and new fans, especially global ones, don't always come back. That's what makes this so dangerous. Many of these viewers are new. They've just built routines around 3 a.m. tip-offs. They've just convinced friends to watch. They've just decided this league deserves space in their lives. That commitment is still soft, still forming.
Disrupt it now, and you risk teaching people that following along isn't worth the effort. And the league doesn't have the luxury of assuming loyalty will carry it through. This isn't like the NFL or NBA, where fandom is inherited and reinforced socially. This is earned attention, earned interest, earned sacrifice. The same effort that drew fans in can push them away if the product becomes unreliable. You can't ask people to wake up in the middle of the night for something that might not happen. There's also the internal contradiction no one wants to say out loud. Players are finally being seen. Their value is undeniable. Their leverage is real. They deserve more. Better pay, better conditions, better support. All of that is true, but the platform enabling those demands is still in its most delicate phase. Break it now, and everyone loses leverage in the long run. That's the tightrope being walked. This isn't about choosing sides, it's about recognizing stakes. Once-in-a-generation momentum doesn't pause for negotiations. It doesn't wait for perfect resolutions. It rewards preparedness and punishes hesitation. And if the league misreads this moment as just another off-season dispute, the cost won't show up immediately. It will show up quietly, in fewer late-night alarms, fewer international flights, fewer new fans sticking around. The clock isn't ticking loudly yet, but it is ticking. And every week that passes without clarity, without visible progress, without signs that leadership understands what's at risk, that sound gets harder to ignore. Because windows like this don't announce when they're closing, they just do. What makes this moment impossible to dismiss is that the people who know the league best are already sounding the alarm. When Sue Bird said this era would be studied in the future, she wasn't speaking as a commentator chasing a soundbite. She was speaking as someone who lived through years of slow, grinding progress, someone who understands how rare it is for attention to spike this fast, this broadly, and this organically. Legends recognize inflection points because they've spent their careers waiting for them. This isn't steady growth. This isn't a gradual climb you chart over a decade and celebrate with cautious optimism. This is a rupture, a straight-up break in the curve. Attendance records shattered. Viewership jumped past ceilings that sat untouched for years. Merchandise demand outpaced supply almost immediately. Social media engagement didn't trend upward, it exploded. Every meaningful metric in sports business moved at the same time, and that almost never happens. That's why future students won't study this moment as a feel-good story. They'll study it as a case, a convergence of forces that arrived without warning. Generational talent, a global digital landscape, fans ready to reorganize their attention if given a reason. The kind of alignment strategists talk about in theory and almost never see in practice. And yet, here it is, playing out in real time, with outcomes still undecided.
What makes it even more remarkable is how unplanned it all was. The league didn't predict this, it didn't model it, it didn't build systems anticipating a sudden worldwide fan base. That's not an indictment, it's an explanation. Very few organizations are equipped to handle exponential interest, but history doesn't grade on intention, it grades on response. Decades from now, this stretch won't be summarized by highlight reels alone. It will be broken down in classrooms and boardrooms. What decisions were made? Which opportunities were seized? Where did hesitation creep in? Was the league bold enough to match the moment its athletes created, or did internal frictions slow everything down at the exact wrong time? The uncomfortable truth is that history is already being written, whether anyone wants that pressure or not. Every delay, every missed connection with fans, every unresolved issue adds a paragraph to that story. And once it's written, it can't be edited. You don't get to replay these moments with better preparation. This is the part where vision matters more than policy, where urgency matters more than caution. Because the rarest moments in sports aren't defined by talent alone. They're defined by what leadership does when the spotlight arrives faster than expected. And right now, that spotlight is unblinking. This is what a once-in-a-generation moment actually looks like. Not polished, not perfectly managed, not neatly rolled out in phases.
It's messy, overwhelming, and moving faster than anyone planned for. Fans have already crossed oceans, wrecked sleep schedules, and rearranged their lives to be part of something they felt immediately mattered. They didn't wait to be invited. They didn't need convincing. They showed up first, and they're still here. That's why this moment represents a fork in the road, not just a high point. One path leads toward expansion, global legitimacy, and a version of women's basketball that finally matches its potential. The other leads toward hesitation, internal friction, and the slow deflation that happens when momentum isn't met with urgency. Neither outcome is guaranteed. Both are being shaped right now. What makes this especially rare is how many forces have aligned at once. A transcendent player shifting attention overnight, a global audience ready to commit immediately, social platforms amplifying organic fandom at a scale no marketing budget could replicate, and a generation of players whose performances are forcing the conversation forward without apologies or explanations. You don't schedule moments like this. You either recognize them or you don't. The fans have already made their choice. From Slovenia to Singapore, from Honolulu to Milan, they've declared their loyalty loudly and publicly. They've proven this isn't novelty interest, it's real, emotional, durable, if it's respected. These aren't projections or data points, they're people who found something worth investing in and are waiting to see if the league values that investment in return. That's the responsibility now sitting on the desk of everyone involved. Owners, executives, negotiators, decision-makers behind closed doors. This is bigger than a season, bigger than a contract, bigger than a single player, no matter how generational. This is about whether women's basketball steps into the space it just unlocked or hesitates long enough for that space to close. Because opportunities like this don't knock twice. They don't pause while organizations debate timelines. They don't reassemble once lost. Momentum is cruel that way. It rewards decisiveness and punishes delay. And the difference between historic breakthrough and what could have been is often determined quietly, far away from the court. Years from now, this stretch will be remembered either as a turning point that changed everything or a warning sign no one acted on in time. The fans have already written their part of the story. The alarms are set, the flights are booked, the loyalty is there. Now the question is simple and unavoidable. Will the league meet this moment or let it slip away?